I want people to feel less like a broken snowflake and more like they're part of the human condition, right? And that these things that we're faced with are things that there are tools for, there are spiritual tools for as well, and that we can approach that. And I think for me, Dale Carnegie kind of gets into that a little bit.
Well, hey, Tim Fewkes, thank you so much for taking the time and being on the Charlie Little Business Podcast today. As a little introduction to those watching of who Tim Fewkes is, he helped start and grow EverOps, DevOps tech company. So he's really involved in like that kind of networking, DevOps, ESP, that kind of stuff. He's a super impressive guy. He likes to paint. He's super well read, very athletic. I've got a list of everything. He does poetry. They're here in Utah right now for a nonprofit they work with in India, which is super cool. Speaks multiple languages, super good memory, a great leader in his church. And I've learned a lot from him, and I hope you guys will learn a lot from him as well. So yeah, once again, thanks for taking the time.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Kind introduction.
Yeah, thanks. From what I've learned from talking to you, there's a lot of tech lingo that actually I wasn't super familiar with. So could you explain to people, almost as if they were in middle school, what it is that you do as far as with DevOps and like the tech field?
Yeah, you bet. So I've lived and worked in Silicon Valley for my whole career, about 25 years now. That's where we're from. That's where we are. Basically, what we were noticing, we started EverOps because we were noticing that engineers weren't being well served with the types of assistance they could bring onto their teams. It does get pretty technical. Basically, there's this space called DevOps, where before, whenever you thought of development, software development, you thought of a Java programmer. They write code, they launch code, and the world uses the code. Well, now there's the cloud, where there's a whole team that needs to take that code that is the product and present that code to the world, present it securely, have the network capable. If the developers want to deploy code 1,000 times a day, that code can kind of continually kind of grow and live out there. So that's really what DevOps is. It's the intersection of people coming in to use the product and the developers providing the product. It's that whole kind of world. And DevOps means development operations, more or less. It's software developers, but for the purpose of operating an application. Does that make sense?
Basically, I mean, it's a B2B kind of business, right? You're working with a lot of businesses. And so what are some of the clients, I mean, maybe not specifically, but that you work with, what's kind of some of the different needs that you fill with that too?
Yeah. So, I mean, for example, let me see if I can talk about, so maybe we can talk about Peloton, right? Peloton's their client, or Zendesk is their client, Snowflake is a client, right? Some of these larger tech companies where, I mean, basically we provide services to SaaS companies, right? Okay. So if you've got a product and you're trying to present it to the world, you need the software engineer's code to kind of, be put on servers, where you can go to the URL and, look it up. Like if you go to DocuSign used to be a customer of ours. You go to DocuSign.com and you start interacting with all sorts of different functions, applications. You're authenticating in, and then you're, maybe paying them money, and you're maybe trying to get rebate for money, or you're trying to use the product, you're trying to, do different things with the product. All of those things interact with a fleet of servers that talk to each other, that have databases on the back end, and we sort of build all of that architecture that the code runs on. Basically, that's the cloud. That's like how the cloud runs.
Very cool. How did you get into that? I know you were kind of you were a tech consultant for a while and you learned about that, but I mean, I know you studied psychology a little bit in college too. How did you end up with the DevOps and the tech field?
Yeah, that's a good question. I was fortunate enough to graduate when the .com boom was just happening.
Early 2000s.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And I was looking at maybe getting a master's in psychology. The psychology job that I had at the time wasn't paying a lot. It was paying about as much as I was making at Little Caesars Pizza when I was in high school. I started writing for a newspaper, and then I started writing for a financial brokerage. And then basically, like the .com boom happened, and they checked my pulse, they made sure I was alive, and they said, can you learn how to code? I basically kind of bought a coding book, and I installed Linux server on in my closet and just kind of chipped away. Yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's interesting. I feel like one of the things that I thought going to college was that at the end of every degree was a career, right?
Sure.
Like the end of an accounting.
A lot of people still think that, right?
Yeah. The end of an accounting degree, I believe there's an accounting career, right? The end of a, I don't know, horticulture degree, I don't know if there's a horticulture career, right? And you totally assume that every degree has a career after it, and I don't think that's true. And so, I kind of realized that a little too late. And I said, what am I going to do to take care of my family? Let's try to maximize the money that we're bringing in. What can I do? And I love to learn, so we just took it from there.
Okay, awesome. And I think you've built the EverOps into a really successful company, really big. There's a few things I'm sure you've done along the way that helped you get there. One of them you mentioned was you'd rather lose a client than an engineer. Is that kind of what you said? Yeah. Basically, you get the right people around you, you can do really good work, and even if you got some ups and downs, like you'll kind of make it through. Was that a big thing? What are some other big things that you think set you guys apart?
So my first advice to people who are entrepreneurially minded is you need to get really close to the problem, right? I think you can kind of go to Harvard Business School and look at it abstractly and say, I'm going to write a case study about this industry, and therefore then I'm going to create a business plan, and then I'm going to get funding, and then I'm going to go solve a problem. I didn't go that route, and I don't know if that route is really repeatable, right?
Sure.
From my perspective, I was in a new industry that was doing smart grid, right? Where previously, in order for power utility companies to know how much power you use, they actually had a truck come and look at your power meter, right? And there's a certain point about 15 years ago where that all went wireless, right? And all of the data went back through community wireless to these middle ground databases, and we don't roll trucks anymore, right? So we were trying to figure out how we were growing very quickly. I was trying to figure out how my operations team could scale very quickly. And we noticed, I won't get into it, but we noticed some real innovation that was needed in the services industry and the third parties that we were bringing in. Third parties, they shoot themselves in the foot. They kind of stay, they don't come in. They have a hard time for a few reasons to solve complex problems. And so we thought, there's an industry there, right? There's a possibility there. And we noticed that, again, not to go into it too far, but DevOps capabilities were converging, DevOps technologies were converging. So we said, I wonder if we could write a contract that's pretty open-ended for what we will deliver, that would, we could create like a 1 year, 2 year contract that someone would sign, that we could come in, and if we just stated all the technology we could do, we could just, be part of their team in perpetuity, rather than be sort of like a professional services firm that would say, like, hey, we'll do this for 4 months and then we'll write a new contract and we'll do this other thing. Maybe we could, it was sort of a risky move that we took to say, we'll do anything you want for as long as you want. You can give our team anything to do because we believe that DevOps technologies are converging enough that you won't ask us to do something that we can't do. Right. And so it was a bit of a contract risk. That's a really, really condensed version of it. But my point is we had to be super close to the problem. Because when I explain my services innovation, the service innovation that is EverOps as contract risk, because no one outside of like a software engineer scrum master is going to be like, whoa, I need that. It's really hard it's kind of hard to get across. But anyway, end up with these sort of tiger teams, DevOps tiger teams that, had a lot of inertia.
Cool. I think another thing that you mentioned that kind of contributed to your company's success was bootstrapping it a little bit. You didn't really go out and get a ton of debt or a ton of venture capital, but did it yourself. And so then at different points in the growth of the company, you can have that question, do I put it back into research and development or do I pay myself, right? And so how did you navigate that? And once again, kind of to the young entrepreneur, what's your counsel as far as avoiding debt and bootstrapping your business?
Yeah, we did bootstrap it. We've been profitable since day one. I wonder if we could have grown quicker if, in the early days, we would have gotten an infusion of cash. But my experience has been that cash kills things more than it helps things.
Interesting.
And we had enough profit margin that we could grow at the rate we felt like was healthy. But I mean, the thing that I love and that I loved before I started EverOps is to see as many problem scenarios as possible in 1 year. So like, if I'm a consultant for 15 years and I can see 4 or 5 really hard problems a year, then I've seen, many problems throughout the course of the decade. And one of the problems is that cash seems to kill people, kill companies, right? It makes them just fat and inefficient. It blows process too quickly, right? I think you need to grow process at the same time that you're kind of growing, that you're scaling. And if you over process or under process, you just kind of got to tool it and get it right. And not having cash or only using the right kind of cash, the right amount of cash to do that is what we felt was best. So that was kind of our philosophy.
That's super interesting. You probably know more about this than I do, but I was going to this business class years ago, and they mentioned something about the Wright brothers, and basically they figured out flight, but without very much money or resources. It's like kind of like you're describing. It's kind of backwards sometimes when you think, oh yeah, I can do that when I have more money or when I have the right team. When it's like, no, it's you just go out there and do it. You figure it out along the way.
Yeah, for me, I mean, since I didn't come from business school, my partner in this came from business school, but since I didn't come from business school, I feel like I'm pretty qualified to say how much it hurt me or whatever in being an entrepreneur. And honestly, I feel like if you can really nail a few things, you're okay.
I do worry that young entrepreneurs put a lot of pressure on themselves, like with exits, right? Like first, let me talk about exits. So, there's a certain percentage of startups are going to be successful. Most of them won't, right? Those that are successful, basically exited in some way, right? The CEO or the founders got paid in some way. I've been involved with, I've been consulting in Silicon Valley for, about 25 years now. And so I've seen a lot of exits from the inside. And in my view, most exits aren't as successful as they're portrayed, right? And so I don't want young entrepreneurs to feel like everyone's just nailing it and all these great exits. I mean, definitely in an exit, a CEO is going to get paid, right? And a founder is going to get paid. But usually there's a lot of fiction in the story that's told on the exit. And that, and then entrepreneur tries and they're not going to try again because they didn't succeed, right? Here's the thing. I feel like we should, you brought up the philosophy of, are you working for, time or are you working for money? And I believe we really should all be working for time. I feel like you shouldn't be more rich than the years you have left of your life. I don't think this is not as valuable. It's not as valuable. So how many dollars does it take for you to get from here to dead? Just have that. I really believe that, right? Like we were talking about that before. Like if you've been fortunate enough to amass $30, $40 million, I think your grandkids are going to choke on vodka and die, right? Because like your kids saw what it took, but they have this big expectation. Like we were talking about expectation, like they've got this expectation for life and what life is like. And, when you have need, you can immediately fill it. But then their kids will lose the plot even more. And it doesn't mean they won't be righteous, right? But I mean, the expectation will be so high that I think eventually we lose the plot, right? And so I feel like you should only amass as much money as it takes to be here to be dead, from here to dead. And if your kids want to follow in your footsteps and try to get money as well, then some of that time that you've got, can be helping your kids go get it, right?
My take on that is if you're in a position where you're able to, you've been really financially successful, but you want your kids to turn out well, is just to not give them that much money. And so that's something I try to do is in college be able to pay for my own expenses and kind of learn along the way about life, and you kind of value stuff when you pay for it. But maybe once I get 30, 40 million, then I have a better perspective on that. But one of my favorite books that I learned a lot from is How to Win Friends and Influence People. by Dale Carnegie. I'm sure you've read it, right?
Yeah.
What have you learned from this? Are some of the biggest takeaways you've got from it?
Yeah, in fact, I've got a buddy in the orphanage I'm a part of in Chennai who gave me that book and also the other book by Dale Carnegie that's right over there. There's a friend named Sean.
Oh, awesome.
How to Win Friends names. So I don't remember exactly the principles that are in that book, but I'll say that I kind of feel like, here's my advice. I feel like more people have common anxieties than we think, right? I think people are afraid. I think people feel like they're frauds when they're jumping into a pool that they've never jumped into. I feel like people they're going to find out that I'm not as good as I
think. The imposter syndrome.
Yeah, the imposter syndrome, right? Yeah, exactly. And I feel like we talk a lot about anxieties as a society, and I feel like a lot of people feel a lot of anxiety, and a lot of people feel the same anxiety, and it's okay, right? I think there's tools to overcome that, but I want people to feel less like a broken snowflake and more like they're part of the human condition, right? And that these things that we're faced with are things that there are tools for, there are spiritual tools for as well, and that we can approach that. I think for me, Dale Carnegie kind of gets into that a little bit. So,
is there another book that you think young people would really benefit from, or that's been really influential in your life at a certain time?
Well, it's a little bit, I wouldn't call it spacey, but the Eckhart Tolle stuff I like The Power of Now, where it's like we don't live in this moment. We live in fear of the future or shame of the past, and it robs us of life. And so I could go my whole life and not live in a present moment. And I think that's a terrible way to live, but it's really hard to get out of, but I like that book.
That's a great insight. Yeah. So what's the book called?
The Power of Now. Yeah. So you can take it as far as you want to take it. I feel like you can take these advice books and go a little bit overboard, and that's, I think, a little true of him as well. But I appreciate a ton of principles that guy does. Yeah.
Awesome. Just as overall advice for maybe a recently returned missionary in his 20s, or what would you tell your 21-year-old self? What's kind of your counsel for the young people, or from the business perspective, just life in general?
I'd say let the Lord instruct you, and that takes patience. He'll let you succeed, but he'd rather you grow than succeed. Like Sister Craig said, I'm going to paraphrase it badly. Like this last conference, she said, "The Lord's not that interested in you being comfortable. He'd rather if you're up for it, he wants to teach you." And so I feel like there's certain times in our life, very few times, when we kneel down or we're in the temple and we say an all-in prayer, where we're just all in, where we say, whatever you want, I'm there. And there's only a few times where it's a pure moment. I would say, have that moment, have it again, and then let him teach you. And if the success as the world defines it comes 30 years later rather than, 4 years later, that's a good thing, right? Because like we were saying, I would hate to have to raise kids in a house that's more than 1,500 square feet. It's a bad idea, not interested, right? Buy a house in the hood, 1,500 square feet, and then your kids aren't gonna it's okay, right? They'll figure it out. So, anyway. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, that reminds me of a quote where it's, if you don't put God first, it doesn't really matter what you put second.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of the principle that you're talking about. So, Tim, thank you so much for taking the time.
Absolutely.
And for all that you've taught us, and I hope we can all follow kind of some of the principles and invitations.
Yeah, great conversation.
Yeah.
And good luck to you too, Charlie.
Yeah, appreciate it.
Yeah.